As I'm driving towards the first cabin, I'm starting to get a sinking feeling that I just ruined my marriage by not going home like my wife had wanted. I don't think she realizes how much seeing those cabins in the 80s has negatively impacted my life to this day. Not only my life, but my father's life as well, where he never seemed to be the same after his encounters with those people at the cabins. The once gentle man who would give his shirt off his own back to a beggar seemed to be more cold and distant after our trip to Alaska. I didn't understand what caused the drastic personality change because I was only 12 at the time. Maybe he saw something at those cabins that the 12-year-old me didn't see. Regardless, he never went back to Alaska, and he never wanted to talk about it. As I drive towards the first, now empty cabin who belonged to the guy who said he was from Oklahoma, I really wish I had something stronger than this coffee. I finally get to the cabin and park my car on the side of Route 3. The road is a little more busier than it was in the 80s, but it's definitely nowhere equivalent to Route I-80 or I-95. It's now 5 p.m. and the sun is starting to get a little dimmer. It's drizzling right now because there's always some kind of precipitation in the air because Alaska is a temperate rainforest where there's always a cloudy mist that surrounds you wherever you go. Oklahoma's front lawn has been reclaimed by Mother Nature, where the weeds are as high as my waist. There's an abundance of birch trees scattered around the cabin that cause enough shade for the roof of the cabin to have a thick layer of green moss. The property itself looks like nature had worked meticulously to have all the green shrubbery strategically placed, maybe as a last ode to the man from Oklahoma. I traverse through the weeds towards the cabin door. Some people might just open the door, but repetition has taught me to always knock. So that's what I do. I knock on the door. I knock and say, "Hello, is anyone in there?" over and over again. Nobody answers, so I go to open the door, but the door's locked. I use my hip to see if I can break the lock, but the door doesn't budge. Being that my efforts had been fruitless, I back away from the door and decide to go to the side of the cabin where I saw a small window. As I move towards the side of the cabin, I hear something that startles me. I hear the door to the cabin open. My whole self seems to clam up as who knows what is about to show itself through the front door. As the front door is fully opened, I see a man. He's about 20 years old and he looks like his family originated from the country of India. I'm completely baffled at this point. I never expected anyone to actually open the door, and I would especially not expect to see a man, a 20-something-year-old Indian man. I try to break the awkwardness by saying, "Hi, my name is Ted, and I was just checking to make sure that whoever is living here is okay." The man just looks at me with the same intense look as the man from New York did. I don't know if this man thinks I was trying to break into his cabin, so I try to explain myself. "Hey, look, I came here back in the 80s, and there was a man who said he was from Oklahoma. It left such a weird vibe that I had to come back and make sure that he was okay." The man doesn't seem impressed by what I had to say and just looks at me as he stands by the cabin door. Seeing that the property is overgrown with weeds that lead to the door, that looks like they haven't been disturbed by anyone except me. "It looks like you haven't been out of the cabin in some time." The man continues to just stare at me. I can't read what he's thinking. The odd thing is that there's a familiar sense about him, but I just can't place it. I continue to look at him and try to place where I remember him from, but my memory can't seem to hone in. I ask him, "Where are you from?" "Pennsylvania." the man responds. And as that word comes out of his mouth, I get chills that radiate through my whole body because now I'm fairly certain who this man is. I think of what to ask next, and rather than beat around the bush, I come out and ask him, "Do I look familiar to you?" The man looks at me with the same intensity in his eyes and doesn't say anything but shakes his head yes to indicate that I do look familiar to him. Now my mind focuses back to the 80s when I was living in Pennsylvania, and a new boy of Indian descent came to our school. Like a cat who sniffs out another cat with anger and apprehension, that Indian boy was treated the same way for the whole year, where mostly kids did their best to make him feel like an outsider. The world is more tolerant now, but back in the 80s, most kids didn't come in contact with different ethnicities in the area of Pennsylvania that I lived. The Indian boy didn't come back the following year, and nobody that I knew even cared enough to ask what happened to him, as us cats didn't even care that he went away. This Indian man has every right to hate me because I did nothing to welcome him to the school, especially when he really needed someone to do that for him. No matter how much religion was preached to me by church and my father, I was no different than any of the other cats. I really feel remorseful, but also scared, as this man should be my age, but is more than 20 years younger than me. The young man continues to stand there as he has given me the opportunity to look at him, to repent for the hardships that I had caused him. I was just an insecure boy who wanted nothing more than to fit in. I'm really sorry that I didn't do more to welcome you, and I'm sorry for the pain that I caused you and your family. Arjun, that's your name, right? He looks at me and shakes his head yes. How did you get here, Arjun? I followed up with. He just looks at me and shrugs his shoulders like the man from New York and the other people did. Is there anything that I can do to help you? Arjun just looks away and doesn't respond to me in any way. Not knowing what to do, so I do the most drastic thing, where I come close to him and reach out to hug him. This type of behavior is really unusual for me, as I'm not an overly affectionate person, but I'm just filled with so much disgust in myself and empathy towards Arjun that it just feels like the right thing to do. As I put my arms around Arjun with my eyes closed, my hands feel something that is soft and spongy, and I slowly open my eyes. Arjun disappears, and now I'm holding nothing more than a clump of moss. I look around puzzled as I don't see Arjun, and I can't explain how the moss got into my hand. I look around further and see the property of the cabin is no longer covered in weeds and birch trees. Even the moss is now gone from the roof, and the cabin door is now closed. I do nothing more than stand there as my brain tries to take in everything that just happened. I really have no idea what to do, as I'm left with more questions than answers. Feeling overwhelmed by the moment, I slowly start towards my rental car. As I start to walk, I hear the door of the cabin start to open again. I slowly turn around with a bit of fear and trepidation, as I'm not sure what I'm going to see. As I look towards the door of the cabin, I see another familiar face, but this time it's the face from the man from Oklahoma, who I haven't seen since the 80s, but has no doubt left an unending impression on me. Like the man from New York, he too hasn't aged significantly. This time a darkness falls over me, where I'm starting to get the gist of the man from Oklahoma. My darkest fears are coming true to who this man from Oklahoma really is. I always had a suspicion, but after seeing Arjun, I can't help but to suspect that this man from Oklahoma is someone who my dad had hurt. The same way a hunter can shoot a defenseless deer with a bow and arrow from a short distance and then go home to play with his kids, my dad may have the same alter ego inside of him that I always suspected. He actually did missionary work throughout the United States, which mysteriously ended in an abrupt manner because he wanted to start a family, which was how he had explained it. I remember going into our crawl space as a kid and finding a metal chest which contained small artifacts like driver's license and other mementos of random people. I told my mother what I had found, and oddly enough, she started to hysterically cry. I didn't know what to do at the time, so I just returned the items to the chest and never brought it back up to anyone, ever again. As I think back to that situation now, Mom must have always suspected something about Dad's past, and seeing those things from the crawl space must have confirmed her suspicions. I always ask myself, was he forced out of his church, or did he voluntarily leave? Now that I look at Oklahoma, my worst fears are starting to come true. For now, I know the reason why my father originally stopped back in the 80s when he saw this man. My father harmed this man in some way, and he probably thought he would never see him again. I remember being a young boy and my dad would talk about traveling across the country. However, that all changed when he came home from Alaska, where he became really tight-lipped when it came to the time when he traveled across the country. I know the question I want to ask this man from Oklahoma, but I'm scared of the response that I'll get. Rather than beat around the bush, I say, do you remember when my family visited this cabin in the 80s? Did that person you saw that day harm you? The man, without hesitation and with the same intensity in his eyes as he had back in the 80s, signaled yes with his head. I didn't say another word. As I walked back to the rental car with my head down because my worst fear had come true, knowing that my dad had harmed that man from Oklahoma, which I always suspected. That's why I had those nightmares for so many years. As I get behind the wheel, I don't know what my next move should be. I just know that I have plenty more cabins to visit.